I want to talk about ways that we can manipulate objects now. And in this example, we probably have a background image, some kind of image or something, but this really could be applied into a div box with a background color on it. This could be applied to a paragraph. It could be applied to anything that you want. And what we do is we take said paragraph or whatever we are, and we do this transform and then, different declarations on it. So in this one, we could do a rotate and do a 0.5 turn. And so we could literally flip whatever object we want upside down. We can also do something called a matrix. And let's go back to 0 turns so you can see it. And our matrix allows us to take different points of the image and move them around accordingly. A translate lets us move the image in relationship to where it was. If you're going to move an item around, I'd probably use relative positioning, but this is definitely something we can do to translate it over a certain amount of pixels and percentages. We can also do a scale where we may want to scale something up twice as big or half the size. You can see there with half the size. We can also skew it and grab something and throw it at an angle. And you can see here where we're scaling and translating at the same time. And this is just something we can use to kind of manipulate our images and things like that. So there's times where we want to smooth out a change of sorts. Okay, so for example, we have our monkey hut here, and I hover over my menu items here, right? And it's immediate as soon as I hover over it. Well, I might want to make it so that slows down. So in this example, if we're changing a scale on something like we showed with transform, we'd use a transition tag to smooth out those two states. Does that make sense? So we're calculating how small that needs to be in order to achieve its final result. So let's do that right now. Let's go into our nav ULLIA, and that's the one that receives the hover, and it's going to change the background. So we'll do a transition, and we want to look at the background color to being transitioned, and we want to say that that's going to take 1 second long, something like that. So let's look at that, and now you can see that white button goes on and off. Now I did background color because that's the declaration I wanted it to transition. If I don't do that, if I do something like all, look at the page when I refresh it. I'm going to refresh it now. Do you see how everything grew larger? It's because this padding was getting applied to it. And the background color and the color was also being applied to it. And so you can see all those different things being applied at the same time from their original state. And so sometimes it's important that you want to specify what item you want to change, or it kind of gets thrown into all. And so that's kind of important to look at. Okay, so with transitions, you have a few declarations you want to look at. You can use the shorthand code. You can use a delay on how long you want it to go before it fires off, how long you want the duration to be, and I said 1 second, what you want it to look at, and a timing function. Okay. So in the simplistic or the simplest view would be change the width, take 2 seconds to change the width, right? Or just the width or whatever there. This is looking at 2 seconds for the width and 4 seconds for the height. So we look at this example and I hover over, you see 4 seconds for the height to be done, but the width goes really quick. Okay, so you can kind of mix and match those if you want. Here we have different curves. And the way that this looks is I have this little graph here, and this is a linear curve, right? We have time. So let's look at those 4 seconds. Okay, it's going to take 4 seconds to get to 100% complete the animation. Okay, and that's what we call a linear function. Okay, and we can look at that here, that top one we go over, and it's constant, growth for those 2 seconds. We're changing the width for 2 seconds, right? Well, you can see here with ease, it goes really fast and then slows down. Okay, slow and then fast a little bit, and then fast and slow and fast, slow, fast, or things like that. And so we can take these curves and we can change this a little bit. Okay, so we could do something like this. And that would mean we're going to go really fast. We're going to do a lot of the animation at the very beginning and then slow it out, and there's not going to be much. So that would go really fast and then slow. And we can make things, you know, something like that where it's going to, you know, go in. Maybe it would start turning white and then go back a little blue and then turn all the way white again if we're changing colors. If we were moving it, it would move, you know, a little bit, go back, and then finish the animation. We could also do something where, you know, maybe we want a little bit more of, you know, like a bounce. It's almost kind of like a bounce a little bit, or it goes beyond and then comes back. And so this is what we call a Bezier curve, and it will give us the code here, the cubic Bezier curves, and it allows us to input that. So that's CSS, that's direct CSS right there that we could use to create that transition. And there's a lot of pre-built transitions in the system already, as you can kind of see some of these right here. But there's ones you can build yourself with a cubic Bezier curve, which is kind of interesting. Again, you can delay it before it kicks off and those multiple things. So this, again, is you hover over it and it delays. It basically smooths out the two states. Okay, and that's really the way you want to think about that. It's you're changing the color, you're changing the size, you're changing position, and it just smooths that all out. The other thing we can look at is something called animation. And animation doesn't smooth out the two states because there is no two states. There's one state and a bunch of what we call keyframes. So let's just go look at an example of that. Okay, we're looking to look at the @keyframes rule. In this example, we are going to take an object. We have a div, okay, and it's got a height and width. It's got a background color applied to it, you know, and then we give it the animation name and then animation duration, and we tie that to an @keyframes piece of code in there and make sure the name matches. And the keyframes, you really need to think of it like, you know, animators used to. They would draw on a piece of paper or take a picture of a cell and move it slightly and do another one. And so this one has like two states. It goes from red to yellow, and you can see when I run it, it just goes from red to yellow, and it's that way. All right, now it goes back to red because the animation's over and the original background color was red. So we could probably take that out and still see the animation go, but it just has two states. But it goes more complex than that. So let's keep going down and look at some other things. So in this example, it's the same thing, but rather than going from red to yellow, it's saying at 25% of it, and at 4 seconds, that's at 1 second, and 50% would be 2 seconds, and 100% would be 4 seconds. And you can see it go through that animation based on time. And if we slowed down our duration, obviously those percentages would be different seconds. But it allows us to kind of say, okay, I want this to be different colors. We can do other things as far as moving it goes. Now you can see here we have some positioning applied, relative positioning. And in this one it's changing the colors like we saw. It's also changing its position using top, left, and things like that, and just changing it back and forth. And so you can now move items and you know, change their color or do whatever you want with them, I guess. We can do delays in animation, so it'll wait a couple seconds before it fires off. We can also tell it how many times we want it to run. Maybe we want that box to go around 3 times before it's done, or just do an infinite. We want that thing to just continue moving. Now that might feel like, you know, we're really going to make these animations, but people have built some really complex animations with CSS. And if you look into vector images, you can also take those vector images and put them on the screen and then mix that with animations or transitions, which is really, really powerful and super cool. That sounds really nerdy, I know, but it is really cool. You can appreciate it if you've ever tried some of these. We have the same curves on how fast they move through the animation, and again we can use a cubic Bezier curve. And then we can look at the film mode, which specifies a style of the target element when animating is not plain before it starts, after it ends, or both. So in this example, it's going to say the following example lets the div element retain the style values from the last keyframe when the animation ends. and so you can see it changing colors and moving, but it took that red from the beginning and went in it blue, and it never had actually put in that red. So it did that, and then it stayed blue too, which is kind of interesting. So that animation moved forward, and so we can look at some different things with that. Backward, the element, it says here, we'll get the styles valued set by the first keyframe, and then this one will keep the values of the last keyframe, or it will do both. And so that's kind of a fun thing, and relatively new as well. You can do shorthand when you do animation name, duration, time, and function, blah, blah, blah. You can put that all in one, and that works just fine as far as going through your animation. Now these are really cool. You use them at times. The best way to use them is not as the main focal point, but something that supports your content. You don't want to take the focus off your content, but sometimes it will grab a little bit of attention and allow you to direct that back to the piece that you want, and it's pretty cool stuff. So hopefully you guys have an opportunity to play with it.